locally, and have I selected the right mic here? I have selected the right mic here. All right, we can do two things. There are some things pending from yesterday, which is hydration only 70% understood. We need to understand hydration again. And then there was middlewares. So we can take one of two paths. We can first learn hydration and middleware and then get into authentication, or we can finish authentication, then get into hydration and this thing. We can also do hydration and middlewares in an offline video where I'm going to cover server and client components. So the poll is, should we start with authentication directly today? Yes or no? Should we start with a clean slate and do authentication directly? Yes or no? If you select no, then we'll do some things from yesterday. Okay. Directly authentication is a clear winner at 70%. So let's get right into it. Hydration I've covered yesterday. Maybe go through the recording again. And if it's still unclear, I'll do it again. Anyways, hydration is something we will cover when we cover server and client components. And the other thing was,
wrong screen.
I am sharing wrong screen. Of course I am. There we go. Thank you. And the other thing was middlewares I'll cover in an offline. We also have one from cohort 2 that I can post. So with that, let's get into authentication and NextAuth. So there are a few ways to do authentication. Sargam is here. Do you want to say hi?
Hi guys.
All right, that's good.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Yeah, I'll see you. All right. So
make me co-host for you.
Yes, we're going to make Ankur co-host. There we go. Cool. Let's get into authentication in Next.js. One concept we haven't yet covered in Next.js is how can you log in with email password? How can you log in with Google, log in with Facebook? Can you stop the raise hands, please, Ankur? So authentication we have done in Node.js. We did not do authentication using login with Google, login with Facebook with Node.js. You can do it using libraries like Passport.js, which is one way to do login with Google in Node.js and Express. If you want a quick, place where you can look at it, you should go to the chess video that's on YouTube. There I've covered authentication using login with Google in Node.js. But today we're going to use understand NextAuth, which makes it very easy to do authentication with login with Google, login with Facebook. And if you want, you can do login with email and password as well. So we'll start with login with email and password. We'll talk a little bit about what should be the actual flow, because until now, whenever we have talked about logging in with email password, we haven't verified the user's email. When you sign up on a website, they usually send you a verification email. You click on a button over there and then you actually sign up on the website. You don't directly snipe someone else's email. Until now, the to-do apps that we have built, I can write bill@microsoft.com as the email and log in. That is a problem. I'm sort of taking over his email and putting a password of mine over there. So for that, the better way to do logging in using email is sending the user an email. We'll talk about that. If you're doing simple usernames and password, that's the easiest. Simple username diya, password diya. User can take any username they want. As long as someone else hasn't taken it, that's the easiest way to do authentication. But today, we'll do NextAuth. We'll do login using username and password, login using email and password, and then login using whatever, Google, GitHub, Facebook, whatever you want to integrate to your website. There are non-NextAuth ways of doing it as well. You don't need NextAuth. NextAuth is a library that we are going to use. But OAuth, I'm introducing a new term here. OAuth is a generic protocol that you can code yourself. You don't need a library like NextAuth, although these libraries make your life a little bit easy when you're dealing with login with Google or login with Facebook. So with that, today, let's get into authentication. Sign in into a Next.js application, which is significantly different from signing it into a React plus Node.js application. We'll understand why. NextAuth is a library that lets you do authentication in Next.js. Can you do it without NextAuth? Yes, you can. You can use raw cookies in Next.js. You can use other libraries as well. Should you? Probably not. There are a few other popular ways here to do authentication. Auth.o is expensive, but what most enterprises use. I think the last time I checked, even chatgpt.com uses Auth.o. So they've sort of made a mark in the authentication industry. They're one of the biggest authentication providers. Providers means that you don't have to do too much. You can rely on them for authentication. They handle all the login with Google, login with Facebook. As the developer, your life is very easy. The problem is they charge very heavy. They charge on a per user basis. So if your users scale very quickly, your Auth.o bill is also going to scale. That's why these libraries and companies get a lot of slack कि यार इन्होंने तो कुछ solve ही नहीं किया, yet they're so expensive. They haven't solved much because it's not too difficult to do authentication in-house as well. So we are going to focus on authentication, doing authentication in-house, although Clerk and Auth0 are the popular companies that let you do authentication that are a little expensive. Firebase Auth is the cheaper alternative. If you want to do authentication using Google and Facebook, you can use Firebase Auth as well. In-house using cookies, this is the other thing I was talking about. Okay, you don't really need NextAuth, even though it makes your life extremely simpler. We'll go through NextAuth, but you can also do it without NextAuth using cookies. Doing it using email and password is sort of easy here. If you want to do login with Google without any external library using cookies, for that you need to understand the Auth0 protocol a little bit. The OAuth protocol. I always get confused between Auth0, which is the company, or Auth0, which is the company, and OAuth, which is the protocol. आपको OAuth समझनी पड़ेगी. You have to understand what the OAuth protocol is to be able to write it yourself. Right? Log in with Google, right? Log in with Facebook yourself. हम क्या करेंगे? Simplest thing, NextAuth library. Cool. But before we get into that, why not just use JWT plus local storage? Why are we creating this as a separate topic? This one's sort of important. Okay, some of you, Daisy, might have abhi tak thought of okay, let me build a Next.js application, and we have already learned authentication using JWT and local storage. So let me just use this. ये तो Node.js है, सबको याद है. How did we do authentication in Node.js? It was very simple. We had our Node.js server where we exposed a sign-in endpoint, app.post/sign-in. And inside this sign-in endpoint, whenever the user sent us a request, we checked their username and password and returned them a JWT, a JSON web token. This could also be a standard encrypted token, but JWTs make your life a little bit easier. Why? Because you don't need a database, so let's not go there. But long story short, this is how we have done authentication until now. If this is our client, the browser, the React application, the browser hits the Node.js server on a sign-in endpoint, gets back a JWT. Now, whenever there is a protected endpoint, app.get/user, let's say the user's details. So if you remember, we used a user middleware to extract the JWT, make sure the user is signed in correctly, the JWT is correct, and only then would we let them access, whatever resource we're protecting here. In this case, let's say the user's profile picture. And that's how we did authentication until now. ये तो सबको आता है कि the client for us until now was a React application. The server was a Node.js server. We were using Express. We exposed the sign-in endpoint. The user would hit the sign-in endpoint, send the right credentials, of course. Username and password is something the user needs to send. We would ensure that their username and password is correct. We would hit a database from here, make sure the password matches, the username matches. Only if it was true, we would return them a JSON web token. And in all future requests, they would send us back this JWT in the header. If you remember, we used an authorization header that took like this, bearer space the JWT that you received over here, and we would send it back in every other request. Hopefully that is clear. Question is, can we follow a similar pattern in Next.js? If let's say this was a Next.js front end, and let's assume that our backend is on Node.js. We don't have our backend on Next.js yet. Can we do this or not? That is the first question. Or what would be the problem when we try to do this? This one's important and slightly hard to digest the first time you're understanding it. But can we do a Node.js server which exposes a sign-in endpoint that I hit from the client, get back a JWT, store it somewhere in my browser in local storage, and in all future requests, my Next.js server is hitting my Node.js server with that token? Let's see. There are a few parts to this. Here is my browser that is going to send a request to a Next.js server. And chalo, to keep it simple, let's not have a separate Node.js server. Simple rakhte hain. We have a Next.js server which exposes a sign-in endpoint. We know that Next.js mein you can create backends. So let's say our Next.js server exposes a sign-in endpoint where we want to sign the JWT and return it to the user. Now, in any future requests, it stores it in local storage as well. In any future request, can I use this JWT that I've stored in my local storage? You might say, Harkirat, yes. Whenever I'm sending a request to, whatever, get the user's details, I'll send the JWT along. Life will be fine. You are right. But there is one very important point that you're missing here. React में क्या होता था? If I go to a React website, let's say google.com is a React website, सबसे पहले the HTML bundle would come back to me. सबसे पहले an empty HTML bundle would come back to me. And यहाँ से from this browser I would send a request to the backend to get the user's details, render them over here. Next.js में क्या था? Next.js में when you're sending a request for the page itself, the user's profile page itself, जो /profile पे आप request भेज रहे हो, that request itself will get rendered on the server. यहाँ से there will be a request that goes to the database. The database needs to return you your profile picture. You render it over here and you return the final HTML to the person. HTML div, and let's say their profile image or their email is present in this HTML. Whenever I hit the profile page, I don't get back an empty HTML, and then I don't hit back the user profile page and render it on the client. We do server side rendering. When you're doing server side rendering, ये जो local storage में आपने JWT store किया हुआ है, ये आप नहीं भेज सकते to the Next.js server. When I'm going to google.com, I can't write google.com ? Header equal to authorization header equal to local storage dot read item token. I cannot do this whenever I'm hitting google.com का पहला पेज. Whenever I'm hitting localhost:3000/profile, let's say I'm trying to get the profile page, उसमें मैं header नहीं भेज सकता. I can't specify the header over here. I can't read the header from the local storage. Which means the first request that goes out, उसमें कभी header हो ही नहीं सकता. The browser, when it is sending the first request to the /profile page, it can never contain your cookie. But the profile page needs the cookie, needs the header to check in the database के हरकीरत क्या है. It needs to know who is sending this request. Whenever in Next.js, your browser is sending a request on a page like this, localhost:3000/profile, the server, if you are using server-side rendering, which you should in Next.js, the server needs to somehow extract the cookie, somehow extract the header. Check here, this is Harkirat's user ID. Harkirat is sending the request. Check the database, get Harkirat's profile picture, render it over here, and send it to the client. ये हो ही नहीं सकता if you are using local storage to store the tokens. अगर आपने टोकन लोकल स्टोरेज में रखा हुआ है, एप्लीकेशन लोकल स्टोरेज, यहां पे कहीं पे आपका टोकन प्रेजेंट है, then in the first request to the /profile, you cannot send the token along. Of course, after you get this data here, you might have a use effect that can hit the backend with the local storage token, but the first request does not have the local storage token. This is not a problem in React. React में हम क्या करते थे? क्या this is my browser. This is my, let's say, React server. This is my Node.js server. So the first thing I do when I go to /profile, whenever I go to localhost:3000/profile, the request goes here. I get back some HTML, some JavaScript. Then yahan se I send axios.get or whatever, fetch localhost:3001, let's say, which is the backend ka URL. Yahan se I send a fetch request. Fetch request I can send the header along. Here there is a header that I want to send, which looks like this: authorization local storage dot read item token. Since the first request doesn't need to know कौन भेज रहा है, ये पहली request doesn't care who is sending it. You don't need to tell the React server कि hi, I am Harkirat, this is my token. Only the subsequent requests that you are sending via JavaScript need to tell the backend server कि hey, I am Harkirat. These subsequent requests can read local storage. This very first request that is going out from your browser, इसमें you can't specify क्या local storage से read करके token भी header में भेज देना. When I go to localhost:3000/profile, the first request that is going out, this profile में, I can never send a request header that has my token in it, that can read from local storage and send my token to the backend. So that is why जो original JWT वाली approach हमारी है, we can't use that here. In fact, you can't even use local storage for authentication in Next.js. You can try, but then you're leaving behind all the benefits of Next.js. अगर आपने ये किया, if you do use local storage for authentication, this is the Next.js architecture that we saw, then your first request that goes to /profile में आप header नहीं भेज पाओगे, and hence you will get an empty bundle. You will have to put a use effect here. You will have to again hit the Next.js server, get back your profile information in a JSON and render it on the client. आपको client side rendering करनी पड़ेगी. But we don't want to do client side rendering. That's the whole point of using Next.js. कि server fill करके दे हमें हमारी पूरी information. The server in the first request itself, जो browser से जा रही है, in this request itself, the server returns me कि हाँ, this is your profile picture, this is your image. But if in the first request itself I can't specify कि मैं हरकीरत हूँ, I can't specify my headers over here. The first request that is going out, I can't specify my headers कि I am हरकीरत. तो the server doesn't know who it is. Server thinks like request कहीं से भी आ रही है. तो server can't pre-render your profile image and send you. Server can simply return you an empty page, and then you can send another request to the backend कि यार, this is my local storage का header. This is my token that I got using sign-in. Please now return me the actual information of me. Then the server will return you your profile information. कि हाँ, your profile picture is whatever, cat.png. And then you can render it on the client. That is client-side rendering. That is what we don't want in Next.js. तो ये थोड़ा समझ आया या फिर अच्छे से समझ आया कि why in Next.js, if you want to use server-side rendering, you can't use the local storage plus header approach. You have to use something else. What is that something else? We'll get to. It's cookies, for those of you who know what cookies are. But you can't use this. Do we understand this much part? कि local storage is plus JWT वाली approach is something you should never use in Next.js, or you can't even use in Next.js चाह के भी. ये किसी को नहीं समझ आया. घोड़े कुल के 4 हैं. आज की क्लास बहुत गंदी स्टार्ट पे 66% को समझ आया, बाकियों को नहीं समझ आया. तो हम अब इसको कोड करने की कोशिश करेंगे. We will try to code the thing that I was just explaining here, and then we'll go from there. Let's assume आप authentication कर सकते हो using JWT plus local storage. We have done it many times. Let's assume you can do it in Next.js also. So let's go to project/cohort3. Let's create a new Next application, and if you want to, you can do it on your side also. वैसे तो if you look at the screen, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So we'll start it off with week 20, bad start. Let's learn bad auth. What are we going to learn? We're going to learn the bad way to do authentication in Next.js, which is our original way, जो React plus Node.js वाले में हम कर रहे थे, which is JWT plus local storage. Let's wait for it to finish. If you want, feel free to initialize a Next.js application on your side as well. And let me open this in Visual Studio Code. कोई इशू नहीं है अगर नहीं समझ आया. In the next 10 minutes, hopefully you're able to understand what's happening. I have initialized an empty Next.js project on my side. One more thing I would like to do before I proceed is npm install JSON web token. That's the standard library we have been using until now for signing JWTs. And let's do our original flow. Original flow क्या था कि यार I will create a sign in endpoint. So let me create a folder called API, a folder called sign in, and in this folder I'm going to define a backend route. Export function get, which simply let's say signs the user in. Ideally post. Ideally we should check the username and password in the DB, and only if it is right we should return the JWT. But assume करो कि user will send the right username and password for now. So I can simply say कि const user ID equal to 1, let's say, const token equal to npm install at types/json web token भी कर देता हूँ. Let me install the types of JSON web token as well. Let me import JWT from JSON web token. And यहाँ पे let me create a token for the user, jwt dot sign. Let's say the token is going to be the user ID and the secret that we have is this. Something like this we will do. I have exposed a post endpoint जहां पे ideally तो मुझे यूजर नेम एंड पासवर्ड चेक करने चाहिए. चलो let me do that as well. कि the user will send us a username and password. So const body equal to await rec.body. Make this an async function, or rec.json I think. And then const username equal to body.username, const password equal to body.password. Check in the DB. तो यहाँ पे there will be a database call. We will check कि username और password सही है नहीं. Only if it is correct will we get the user ID from the database, sign a token and return it to the user. Token. इतना समझ आया? We have done this in Express many times. We are doing it in Next.js the first time. Let's do a poll at this point. Do we understand the? Okay, there we go. Poll has been started. ये भी हमें अच्छे से समझ नहीं आया. Half an hour into the class and I'm feeling this is not going to be the best class. Which part of this feels weird or it is lagging? Code along करना है. Q&A में बताएं क्या इशू है. Anything that's bugging you guys or should I just proceed? आ गया समझ, सही चल रहा है. All righty. Dry run करेंगे. उसके लिए we are going to start this project locally. npm run dev मैंने run किया. This is the endpoint that has been exposed, the post endpoint. And let me go to Postman. Let me go to localhost:3000/API/signin. And let me send a post request with a username and a password. Username Harkirat. Password 123123. Let's say these credentials are correct. Our backend isn't verifying these credentials. यहाँ पे ideally we should check the credentials in the database. जब हम कोड लिखते थे पहले app.post/signin. So what would we do? Const body equal to rec.body. Const username equal to body.username. Const password equal to body.password. Then we would hit the database, make sure the username and password is correct. Then we would return. We would sign the token, something like this. We would return the token to the user. rest.json token. यही करते थे. This तो we understand. The Express code for this look like this. The Next.js code for it looks like this. Next.js also lets you do backend. And यहाँ पे भी get the body, get the username, get the password, check it in the database. The database will return you a user ID, create a token, return the token to the user. Same thing we used to do over here. when we were in Express. This is just writing the same thing in Next.js to make our lives a little bit easier. Because we are only using Next.js. When I hit this backend endpoint, it returns me a token जो हम फ्रंट एंड पे स्टोर कर लेते थे. वी वुड स्टोर दिस इन लोकल स्टोरेज. So let's do that. Let's create a page now. I'm going to create a page called sign in. And यहाँ पे I will have an input box for the username, input box for the password, and a button that says sign in. You can make this more elaborate, more pretty, but abhi ke liye such a page is fine. A simple page which says sign in page has two input boxes and a sign in button. If I go to localhost :3000/sign in, I see the sign in page. ये पहला username डालने की field. This is the field for adding the password. When I click on sign in, what should happen? What should happen when I click on sign in? We should send a request to the backend to actually sign the user in. So let me do a npm install Axios to install the Axios library locally. And यहाँ पे I can do axios.post /API/sign in. I will send the username, which will be something that will come from the input box, password, which will be something that will come from the input box. I'll get the response here. And then I will store it in local storage. I will get the response from the backend and store it in my machine's local storage, my browser's local storage. So I would do local storage.set item token, rest.data.token. This is how we did authentication in React plus Express. This is how we are doing authentication in Next.js, or at least trying to do. लग तो रहा है अभी तक सही, everything looks fine for now. I have a sign in page. The sign in page looks like this. When I click on the sign in button, I send a request to the backend with the username and password that I've hard coded for now. Whatever token यहाँ से आता है, that I store in the local storage. Let's see, does it work? If I sign in over here, let's look at the request that goes out. When I sign in, of course, this will not work because this needs to be a client component. Yesterday we discussed, अगर आपको on click handler डालना है, if you want to put a on click handler inside a component, that component needs to be a client component. If you don't understand this part, ignore for now. I just added a small directive here at the top. Now when I start the server locally, I can go to the sign in page. I can try to sign in with some username and password. And when I click on the sign in button, we send a request to localhost :3000/API/sign in. It is the same request I was sending in Postman over here. Localhost :3000/API/sign in. Backend assumes जो भी username password भेजोगे, that is fine. It will return you a token. This is the token that I got back. This is the token that I stored in local storage over here. If you look at my local storage, there is a token that I have just stored over here. If I delete this token, refresh, the token is now gone. But if I sign in, then the token comes back. So after I sign in, we store a token in the local storage. अब क्या करना होता है? इतना समझ आ रहा है? We understand this. Let's do a poll. Same authentication flow we have done until now. We did it using React plus Express. Today we are doing it using Next.js only. Why are we doing all of this? Just to understand कि जो local storage वाली approach है, that will not work in Next.js. Let's do a poll. Let me do it. Do we understand this flow that I've built until now? ये सबको समझ आ गया. 91%, 92%, beautiful. What is the problem in this? अब अगर मान लो एक प्रोफाइल पेज है that we want to, person is logged in, person can access their profile page. तो let's create a profile page यहाँ पे next. Page.tsx. And if you remember, we discussed कि one way to do profile pages is this. Let's do the dumb way first. React वाला way, client side rendering वाला way. कि यार, I will first create a backend endpoint. So let me create a backend endpoint called API/profile/route.ts. What have I done? Created a backend endpoint, export function get. This, let's say for now, simply returns next response.json. Avatar URL is some image over here. images.google.com/cat.png. Of course, we should ideally check the headers over here. कि user है कौन? We should do a const headers equal to rec.headers, const authorization header equal to headers of authorization, and then do a jwt.decode, const decoded equal to jwt.decode the authorization header that the user sent with our secret. Then this decoded will have the user ID, and this user ID say I will hit the database. I will do a hit the DB to get the user's profile picture. This is what I should ideally do. A get endpoint should be authenticated. When we used to write the profile endpoint in Express, what did we do? app.get/profile, and we used to first have a user middleware. Then we would actually have the handler, right? This user middleware would extract the cookie from the header, extract the header, make sure the user is logged in, decode their JWT, verify their JWT, and only then the control would reach here. यही करते थे. Same thing, I've shown a pseudocode of over here. I will extract the headers, get the authorization header, decode the authorization header, get the user ID, hit the database, get the profile picture, return it to the user. ये सारे मैं अभी के लिए हटा रहा हूँ. Hard coding the endpoint, it will just work. So if we were doing our original approach, क्या करते हम? I would have gone here. I would have added a use effect. And यहाँ पे I would have done an axios.get /API/profile. Send the headers along. क्या the authorization header is local storage.get item token. यही करते. And then propagated it to a state variable, const profile picture, comma set profile picture empty. And then यहाँ जाके we would have done a set profile picture to be rest.data. जो भी यहाँ से return हो रहा है avatar URL. This is what we would have done. Do you need me to show this in action? Let me quickly show it. Profile picture. I need to await this. Dot then कर लेते हैं. Change the syntax a bit. Nothing too complicated. Async await की जगह I am using the dot then syntax for now. Get the profile picture. Send the authorization header. This is the important bit. कि client side पे whenever this use effect runs, whenever all of this runs on the client, on the browser, I send the request with the token that I have stored in local storage. Let's see it in action. If I code हो सकता है थोड़ा कम समझ आए, that is fine. If you don't understand this code, totally fine. But the point is कि when I need to make this a client component as well. When I go to the slash profile page, how am I getting back my image URL? I am initially, if I look at the network tab, I am initially getting back just empty HTML. यहाँ पे वो profile picture नहीं है. That is why when you refresh, you see a flash in the beginning. And then after some time, I am sending a request to slash profile, which is returning my avatar URL. Of course, I am sending my header. I am sending an authorization header, which reads the token from my local storage. और वो मैं backend पे भेजता हूँ. Backend verifies the token and returns me back my profile picture, as you see over here. Avatar URL यहाँ आया, propagated it to the front end. This is client side rendering. This render happened on the browser, did not happen on the server. The initial HTML that I got back did not have the avatar URL, only had an empty page. And बाद में जाके this JavaScript ran on my browser and I sent a request to the profile endpoint, got the data and rendered it on the screen. This is client side rendering. This is one way you might say, Arkirat, हो गई authentication. ऐसे ही तो करनी थी. This is how you were supposed to do authentication, Arkirat. But there is one very subtle problem in this, which is that when you are hitting the profile page, you are not getting the user's image rendered from the server. You are not getting the benefits of server-side rendering. There is no point of moving to Next.js then, right? If you can't server-side render. If you're doing client-side rendering, do it in React only. How can I, in this initial request, get the user's data here? How can I? जब पहली रिक्वेस्ट जा रही है उसमें मैं यहाँ पे avatar.png कैसे शो कर सकता हूँ? That is the question we are trying to answer, and why local storage is not enough for that. Let's do a poll. Do we understand this now? Client-side rendering way to do this. %89% is decent. For now, coming to the most important question. If you remember, अभी तो हम जो कर रहे हैं वही गलत है. This is not how you do. You should create components in Next.js. What should you do instead? You should do something like this. यहाँ पे you should send the request, right? You should convert this into an async function. Remember we learned this server components. Okay, the better way to do data fetching in Next.js is what? The better way to do data fetching in Next.js is do it right here. Axios.get should happen directly over here. So यहाँ पे I should do something like this. Okay, const res equal to await axios.get this specific endpoint. Send the header local storage.get item, that is fine. And then say const profile picture equal to res.data.avatar URL. This is the right way to do server-side rendering. If you remember, we have already covered this a few times. Okay, you can do it the other way, but that is the React way. This is the Next.js way. इसका फायदा क्या है? Server-side rendered page you will get pure HTML from the backend, which has my profile picture rendered. Let's for a second comment this, and यहाँ पे just put a random URL. Let's say something like this. And देखते हैं front end पे क्या होता है. I have hard coded the profile picture to a variable and rendered it over here. तो front end पे now if you look, the first request itself, if I refresh this, the first request itself has cat.php. It is not an empty page. It is server side rendered, proper rendered चीज हमारे पास आई. Initial render में you see cat.png. There is no follow-up request that needs to go from the client. But when I try to go to the original logic, something breaks. It says local storage is not defined. Why? Because this is the server component. Local storage, server side rendering. This rendering is happening on a server, on a Next.js server. That doesn't have access to your local storage. When the request is coming, this is our Next.js server, and this is the browser. When the request is going, server पे it is getting rendered. यहाँ पे local storage doesn't exist. ये तो server है, some EC2 machine, some virtual machine on the internet. This is your browser. Here local storage exists. But when you send the initial request and you're trying to server side render, यहाँ पे local storage कहीं नहीं है. There is no concept of local storage here, which is why the error that you see is local storage is not defined. So the question is, कि when I am sending this very first request, when I am sending this very first profile request, how can I send my token from here? मैं ये token तो यहाँ exist करता है, यहाँ तो exist करता नहीं. तो can I somehow shove my token in the first request? The first request that is going out, can I somehow shove my token in this first request local storage से read करके? You cannot. This first request is going out from here. It is not going out from JavaScript here. It is going out from the browser. I can't say question mark token equal to, local storage dot read. I can't read local storage from here. So the first request can never carry your authentication tokens. जो पहली request जिसमें you expect some HTML to come back, you can't send the token from here. You can't get the token over here. Local storage does not exist here. It exists over here. So I can also not send it. I can also not get it from here. तो पहली request में आप चाह के भी कुछ authenticated वापस नहीं ला सकते. In the very first request that you're sending, even if you want, you can't shove a request header here which has a token. Unless you use something else, we'll come to what that is. But you can't put an authorization token over here. Which is why the server, even if it wants, यहाँ पे जो request वो send कर रहा है या फिर it is trying to touch the database, it doesn't know who you are. This first request that is coming is not carrying the authorization header. When I go to localhost:3000/profile, this request that goes out, इसमें I can't put the authorization header anywhere because this is going purely from the browser. This is not a fetch request or an Axios request. It is going from here. So I can't send the token inside here, which means यहाँ पे token आने का कोई तरीका नहीं है. I can also not read it from here. If the user was sending it, I could have put it over here. But the user can't send me the token over here. And I can also not read it from local storage. So this code will never know who you are. यहाँ पे you don't know who the person is here. So you can't hit a backend and check कि इस बंदे की profile picture क्या है, because this person is not identifying themselves. When they're sending a request, they are not sending their token. Even if they want, they can't send their token because their browser by default is not going to send anything. And this is not an Axios request that I'm sending from the JavaScript. This is a request that's the top level request that's going out. This top level request can't carry my header. There is no way for me to read local storage from here. That is why in Next.js, even though you can use the original approach we've been talking about, the client-side rendering approach, that takes away the benefits of using Next.js. This is the original approach that we decided. The Node.js approach, hit the backend, get a JWT, send the authorization header, get back the response. But you can't use this in Next.js because when you hit the profile endpoint, you get back empty HTML, then you can send a backend request. But that's client-side rendering. When you're sending the first request, there is no way for you to shove your JWT in there. So the server doesn't know who you are. Server can't give you server-side rendered Next.js. Do we now understand why that approach is bad? Wow, we took 50 minutes on this. Do we understand this? Let's do a poll. Oh boy. ठीक है. It's 60 something percent. It's 85 now. So if you don't understand why this is bad, it's fine. I mean, we didn't even cover this in cohort 2. I mean, a little bit we did. But that is fine. This slide is purely on why this approach is not good. And if you don't understand it, it is sort of fine. Even though I would urge you to go back to this video and, understand it better. But ignore the last 1 hour. Let's assume we did not want to get into any of these technical ability or, things that we just discussed. Let's start a Next.js project and add authentication to it. Very easy to do. If you go through the NextAuth docs, you'll be able to do it like this. We'll still slowly try to build on top of it. But if you go to the NextAuth docs and if you've done Next.js, should be very simple for you to add authentication to your Next.js project without knowing इसके पिछली slide में क्या था, तो ignore that. ठीक है? Next.js lets you add authentication to your Next.js application. Sorry, NextAuth lets you add authentication to your Next.js application. And it supports something called providers. So they have written a very generic library जिसमें you can bring in various providers. An Apple provider, a Facebook provider, a Google provider, an email provider, which are all, companies that expose OAuth. Login with Google is a thing. Login with Facebook is a thing. Login with Apple is a thing. So the good thing about them is that they've written a very generic library. And in the future, if there is a new social network, let's say TikTok, so very easy to write a TikTok provider for it because all of these companies follow the same protocol, the OAuth protocol. So it's very easy for you to change a few URLs and you can add another provider over here like the TikTok provider or the Discord provider, so on and so forth. Let's not go through the code just yet. Let's slowly try to build upon it. We discussed this yesterday. Catch all routes. We need to know this before we proceed. I'm going to do a quick recap of 2 minutes of what are catch all routes. And then we will proceed to writing our very first Next.js application with authentication. ठीक है? Break लेना है? Should we take a small break before we proceed? Let's do a poll. Should we take a break? Yes or no? Sorry, I'm doing too many polls today. Do you guys want a break? Yes or no? Bang in the middle. 47% said yes or 48% said yes. Very small 1 minute breather you guys can take because this is a fresh start now. Good for us to do a fresh start, thoda breather ke baad. Whatever I covered until now, you should go back to and understand later. Okay? Tab tak let me look at Q&A for a minute and then we'll proceed to today's class. Is it like passport? Sort of. Isn't the first request / sign in and not profile what I'm missing? After you sign in, uske baad the first request. All right. A few questions. How can the Next.js? All right. Cool. Nothing too major in Q&A here. So let's get into catch all routes. ये तो revision है from yesterday. If you ever create a Next.js application, it has file-based routing, which means if you go to API/profile, this is the handler for it. If you go to API/signin, this is the handler for it. These are backend routes. And if you go to /profile, that is the front-end route, /signin, that is the front-end route. This is what is called file-based routing. What we discussed yesterday was, let me get rid of all of these folders and create a single folder for now, API. Another folder inside, auth. And let me add another folder for now called 1. API auth 1 के अंदर let me add a route handler. Export function get, which simply returns next response.json message hi there. Something like this. Now let's say I want to, what will this do? This will make sure that whenever I'm going to localhost:3000 /API/auth/1, I get back this hi there message. This will not catch API auth/2 404. तो उसके लिए I will have to create another folder. Let's say folder called 2, जिसके अंदर I will have to put the same route.ts file. Now if I go to API auth 2, I see the message over there. Now let's say I want to support another message, third route over here called API auth Harkirat. So I will have to create another, folder and then route.ts. Now if I go to API/auth/Harkirat, I see the same thing. But if I go to Harkirat 1, I don't. तो a catch all route क्या होता है? Catch all route says कि अगर आपको सारा कुछ कैच करना है beyond a point, If you want to catch everything after API slash auth, so what you can do is you can create a catch all route. This we discussed yesterday. So this is more of a revision. But if I write this dot 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 something, let's say module, this square brace dot dot dot, some name over here, I've named it module, you can name it whatever you want, and closing brace, इसके अंदर अब अगर मैं एक route.js define करूंगा, if I define a route.ts here, now I could change the code a little bit. Rather than having API auth 1, API auth 2, API auth Harkirat, I wrote API auth square brace dot 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 module closing square brace route.ts. अब क्या होगा? Any request that comes to localhost 3000 slash API slash auth slash anything, could be 1, could be 2, could be Harkirat, could be slash Harkirat slash 123, could be a very long path. As long as it starts with API slash auth, it will be caught by this handler right here. That is what a catch all route is. This route catches any request that comes to slash API, this folder right here, slash auth, this folder right here, slash anything will get handled by this guy. And this guy doesn't care. We are not checking what the route is. We are not checking where the request is coming. We are simply returning hi there for now. So do we understand this? I hope we do. Let's not do another poll. We've done too many today. If you don't understand this, we discussed this yesterday. You should go back to yesterday's class. Let me quickly recap. If you want to add a single route handler for slash API slash auth slash user, slash API slash auth slash random, API auth 123, API auth anything 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then you can create a catch all route. This is what it can look like. API slash auth slash square brace dot 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 NextAuth closing square brace slash route.ts. We have made something very similar. API auth square brace dot 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 module closing square brace route.ts. We tried going to a few of these endpoints, it works. The reason I'm introducing this is because the NextAuth library that we are using today, what are we using today? NextAuth.js. If you go to their docs, get started, they say, यार सबसे पहले तो install the library, npm install NextAuth. This example code describes how you can add authentication to a Next.js application. Create a new project. We have already created a fresh Next.js project locally. If you haven't, I would urge you to do that. And then it says install NextAuth in there. And the third step here is API, ignore pages for now. We'll come to what pages are. Don't worry about it. But API auth square brace dot 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 nextauth.js. Yahan pe put this code. It says any request that is coming to slash API slash auth slash anything, please let me handle it. I am going to handle that specific request over here. So that is where catch all routes come here. Okay, these guys say, even though this is the old router, if you are using Next.js 13 or above, which we are, and the app router, which we are, the developer can define what is defined on the sign up page, the sign in page. But API auth sign in, API auth anything will be handled by this guy. Do we understand this? The initial bootstrapping. Let me do it one more time. Let me create a fresh Next.js project. If you want to follow along now, you can do it from this point. I am initializing a fresh Next.js project. And in the future, if you ever initialize or create a new project, this is standard things that you do. If you see any of my YouTube videos, first 3 minutes go in this, doing this only. I'm going to name it week 22. Select all the default values over here. We already understand what each one of these default value does. Open this in Visual Studio Code. Install the NextAuth library over here. npm install next-auth. Create a app/API/auth/ square braces open dot NextAuth square braces closed /route.ts and यहाँ पे add the default code that you can find over here in the initialization section. Import NextAuth from this, const handler equal to this, export handler as get and post. Any auth library, any Next.js project that you look at that uses authentication using NextAuth, same ही structure होगा. Let me show you a few. If you go to github.com/code100x/dailycode, इसके अंदर if you go to apps/web, which is a Next.js application, इसके अंदर if you go to app, you will find a API folder, you will find a auth folder, you will find a .NextAuth handler, and route.ts में you will see the same code over here. Import NextAuth from NextAuth, const handler equal to NextAuth, export handler as get, export handler as post. यही तो कोड हमने locally भी लिखा है. Same code we wrote locally. Same code exists in this Next.js project. If I go to CMS, if I go to source/app, you will see there is a API folder which has a auth/.NextAuth folder, जिसके अंदर there is a route.ts file which has the same structure that we saw a while back. So this is standard thing you will do for a really long time. The only thing that is left is understanding what do we pass to this function. Even locally, we have written this. We haven't yet passed this object. We don't know what object to pass in here. What exactly needs to go inside this, right? यहाँ पे भी I'm passing some auth options. That is what we have to learn next. Can you guess what it would be? यहाँ पे you define के do you want to use Google, do you want to use login with Facebook, do you want to use login with email and password, do you want to use JWTs, so on and so forth. वो यहाँ पे आता है. These are configuration parameters you have to add. You tell Next.js कि configure authentication using these. Use login with Google, use login with Facebook. Next.js handles everything else. Next.js handles how can it create the local storage, token, cookies, something, and handle authentication for you. So do we understand this? How do you initialize an empty NextAuth project, Next.js project with authentication using NextAuth? Do we understand this? Great. 92% is beautiful. So now comes the question of configuration parameters. So let's go through their docs, or you can go through daily code docs, either is fine. If you remember initially, we said NextAuth has this concept of a bunch of providers. कहाँ लिखा था? I don't think I discussed this. But in NextAuth, if you go to their official docs also, you will see there is a section called providers, which has a lot of providers. Login with Apple, login with Atlassian, login with Auth0, login with Discord, login with Coinbase, login with email, Netlify, so on and so forth. These are what are called providers. And the first thing you have to do is you have to define what all providers you are going to use. Are you going to use login with Google? Are you going to use login with Facebook? What providers do you want to use? The most configurable provider, configurable का मतलब क्या है मैं बताता हूँ, is the credentials provider. If you ever want to do login with email and password, this is one of the options. The credentials provider. The credential provider allows you to handle signing in with arbitrary credentials, such as username and password, or two-factor authentication, or UB keys if you have seen them, or you might have a website जहाँ पे username भी चाहिए, email भी चाहिए, password भी चाहिए. So irrespective of what combination of inputs you have, you can use the credential provider. We are usually familiar only with email and password, but a lot of times there is email, password, and admin secret. Let's say you need email and password. You also need a third input field, admin secret. So that is why this is highly configurable. Credentials provider जब use कर रहे हो, you can do login with email and password, or you can do login with 3 different input fields, or you can do login with simply password कि simply एक field है. Depends on how your application is structured. So let's read through the documentation of the credentials provider. It says कि providers जो हमने यहाँ लिखा है is going to be an array. कि what all providers are you using? Google, Facebook, something else. And for us, we are first going to use the credentials provider. The other ones are much simpler. Logging in with Google is actually much simpler than this. Credentials provider is the sort of harder one amongst these. So I'm saying that the providers that I want are number one, the credentials provider. This is imported from here. NextAuth / providers / credentials. Similarly, there will be NextAuth / providers / Google, so on and so forth. So let me import this to the top. It says give me a few fields. Number one, कि जो front end पे page होगा, the sign in page, what should it say? Let's say I will say it should say login with email. That is the name of our credentials provider. कि front end पे बंदे को क्या दिखे? When the person comes to your front end page, what should they see? Credentials. What all input fields we want from the user? We want a username, let's say, whose label is username. Front end पे user को username दिखेगा. Type is text, which means it should appear in the input box. It should not be hidden in the input box. And placeholder is, let's say, harkirat@gmail.com. A placeholder that appears in the input box. These are all configurations for the front end. Okay, front end pe eventually, what should the login page look like? Password, which is label is password, type is password. So that front end pe, it is hidden via stars. When I go to facebook.com, this is a text input box. This is a password input box. It is hidden by default. That is what type password would do. And lastly, a function called authorize. Okay, when the user does login, when the user does give you some credentials, then yahan pe you need to hit your database, check if the credentials are correct. And if they are correct, you should return the user. If they are not correct, you should return null. So yahan pe we will do something like const username equal to credentials.username, const password equal to credentials.password. And here we would write the logic of hitting our database, making sure the user actually exists in our database, and then returning if the user exists. So let's say I'm going to do const user equal to name Harkirat, ID 1, and I don't know, email or username harkirat@gmail.com. Let's say the database returned us this. Yahan pe I will do a database request to check if this username and password are correct. If they are correct, then I will say return user. If they are not correct, if the database tells me user doesn't exist, then I will return null. So that is how you do a credential provider based login in NextAuth. Let me repeat all the steps, then we'll see it in action to samajh aa jayega. When you are using the credentials provider, you tell what should appear on the front end when the sign-in page is opened, what all input fields you want to show, username and password, and what should happen when the user submits. If they do submit correctly, if their username and password is correct, then this function should return that user, then they will log in. If it is incorrect, then this function should return null, then they will not log in. Then they will see an error, okay, username and password is incorrect. इतना सा कोड लिखा मैंने बस. I did not have to write anything else. And now if you see, if I do npm run dev and I go to localhost colon 3000 slash API slash auth slash sign in, मेरा sign in page is created. I did not have to write the HTML for it also. I did not have to write the components for it also. You can override it if you want. You can create a prettier one, but this is the default NextAuth login page. It gave you whatever fields you wrote over here. If I add a third field over here, admin password with the label of admin password, then on the front end also you will see three fields: username, password, admin password. This front end is automatically generated from these configurations that you have sent over here. We are right now only focusing on very simple login, username and password, but you could have complicated logins. You could have an OTP that the user might want to put, or an authentication key. If you've ever logged into Google and you have 2FA, then you have to put an auth key over there. So then you need three input boxes. All of that is configurable from here. So just writing this much code, even there's some type error here. I think this used to be a string. There you go. Even though, yeah, the type error is gone. The user will come to your website, put a username and password. When they click on this button, a request will go to the backend. That request will eventually reach over here. And yahan pe you will do the checks. If the user is logged in correctly, then you will return user. If the database returns you a relevant user who has this username and password, then you can return the user over here. They are logged in. If not, then they are not logged in. Let's see it. Let me put a log over here. Console.log, username and password. Let's confirm, is the request coming to the backend or not? So if I go back here and try to refresh, let's say, inspect element, network tab, put a username, put a password and click on sign in with login and email. It fails. Let's try it one more time. Succeeded this time. I don't know why it failed the first time. Let me know if you find why. But now that I logged in, it redirected me back to the front end. And if I look at my logs, I see the username and the password was logged over here. So the control did reach over here. I should have hit the database. We don't have database logic right now. I assumed the database returned me a user and वो user मैंने यहाँ से लौटा दिया. The user logged in. How do I know that the user is logged in, Harkirat? We'll come to that very soon. But login process थोड़ी समझ आई कि when I now go to this website and go to slash API slash auth slash sign in, I can put some credentials over here, click on login with email. Okay, and I know why that error is now. When I log in with email, I get redirected back. I am logged into the website. How does the backend authenticate? How does the frontend authenticate? Different question. Login process किसी तरीके से तो automate हो गया. Do we understand this? Let me recap. We did nothing. We did what the official docs told us. सबसे पहले we went through installation. We installed NextAuth. We created a app slash API slash NextAuth slash route handler by following this second guide, the better guide, the app router guide. So we went to the app router guide, created this folder, added this logic, and inside this configuration, I added my very first provider, the credentials provider. There are many providers over here. We used the credentials provider, which is intended for things like logging with username and password. What did the logic look like? It looked something like this. Give it a name. That name is what appears on localhost colon 3000 slash API slash auth slash sign. whatever I've written over here, log in with email. I would have hoped this would have shown on the front end somewhere. Oh, there you go. Log in with email. Sign in with, यहाँ पे email आना चाहिए. Whatever you write over here is what appears after sign in with email. I've written email over here, sign in with email. That is the significance of this name. Credentials is what all the things do you want? Username and password are, let's say, the two fields you want, automatically generated over here. And then an authorize function. Okay, when the user clicks on the sign in button, puts a username and password here, you will get access to the username and password here. You have to tell the library कि login हुआ है कि नहीं हुआ है. You have to write custom logic over here. Okay, given this username and password, hit your database, make sure the user is already there. If they are, then return user, else return null. If return null, it will tell the user username and password are incorrect. If I don't return the user from here, if I only return null from here, and if I go to the sign in page now and put some credentials, sign in failed, check the details that you have provided are correct. So if I put any credentials now, it will give me this error. Unless the database returned the right thing. If the database request over here did return the right thing, then we will return user. User is defined over here. We return the user. Then we see, that the user actually logs in. They get redirected back to the original page. Do we understand this? Abhi tak we have only seen logging in. We have not seen how can the backend return us our profile, our original problem statement. How can I put a logout button here? How can I put a sign in button over here? Those are things we are yet to see. But do we thoda understand the syntax of this thing? Maybe before you proceed, one small thing. Okay, we have a poll here. Decent. 87%, 88% is not bad. Let's proceed. What I was about to show was it's very easy to add Google also. ये तो हमने डाल दिया, थोड़ी सी मेहनत लगी. This was a little hard. If you want to add login with Google, it is as easy as going to providers / not these providers / Google, and just add these 3 lines of code. Import Google provider from NextAuth / provider / Google, and add another provider to your list of providers. We have the credentials provider, very complicated thing that we had to write. Iske right afterwards, I can say we have another provider, Google provider. Now, yahan pe we have to understand what is this client ID, what is this client secret. Different question. We'll come to how can you get a client ID and client secret. But you can add irrespective, like infinite number of providers over here. Let's say I also want to add login with GitHub. So I can go to the GitHub provider. I can get the GitHub provider from here, NextAuth / provider / GitHub. And I can add another provider over here called the GitHub provider. Again, we have to understand where this GitHub ID comes from, where this client secret comes from. That is a different question we'll come to. But code wise, you have to do only this much. If I go back here now to /API /auth /signin, notice I have our standard credentials login. I also have login with Google. I also have login with GitHub. They won't work, of course, because these credentials that I'm giving it are incorrect. This one is also incorrect. It's hard coded right now. But at least the button is there. Of course, there is some bug over here because the client ID is incorrect. It is saying you auth client was not found. But they're very easy to get. It's very easy to add more providers over here. But for now, let me get rid of these. ठीक है? ये हमें समझ आ गया. The credentials provider, we see it in action. The question is, how can we show the user their information, let's say, on the front end? If they're on the landing page, how do we know if the user is logged in? How can we show them a log out button? If they are not logged in, how can we show them a login button? Things like these. So that is what we have to cover next. That requires a prerequisite or one other thing we have to first learn, and then we can get into it. So take a breather at this point because we're going to take a side detour while we move on to this next slide number. Actually, before we take that detour, um, yeah, that's the problem. Steps are mentioned here, but there is a small detour we have to take. कर ही लेते हैं. So when you are using NextAuth, very soon you will see when we go to, let's say, our landing page, page.tsx जो app folder में है. Let me get rid of everything here. Let me remove everything from the landing page. खाली landing page है. Let me write hi there over here. When I type hi there over here and go to localhost colon 3000, I see hi there over here. Now let's say I want to see a sign button, a sign up button, a log out button. If the user is not logged in, I want to see a log out button. If the user, sign in button. If they are logged in, I want to see a log out button. So how can I render that? How do I know over here, okay, is the user signed in or is the user not signed in? There are again two ways. Depends on whether or not you want to do this on this in a server component or a client component. Let's go with a simple approach. There is a hook that NextAuth provides you. Const session equal to use session. There is this hook that NextAuth provides you. Use session hook. जहां पे you can simply check कि यार if session dot status is authenticated, then show the user a sign in button, else show the user a log out button. If it is authenticated, then show the user a logout button, else show them a sign in button. Our life should have been very easy. This code does work, but there are a few problems. The only problem being, if you want to use this hook, you have to wrap your application inside a session provider. So let me just show you client API. If you go to their client API, they say there is a use session hook you can use on the client. The use session React hook in a NextAuth client is the easiest way to check if someone is signed in. That is exactly what we want. They are saying you should use it on the client. ठीक है. We will convert this to a client component. They're saying use the use session hook like this. Const status equal to use session. If status is authenticated, then render this, else this. But one more thing they say. Make sure that session provider is added in some place. This is again Next.js older versions. For us, it will be different. But what they're saying is कि जहां भी आप इस use session hook को use कर रहे हो, wherever you are using this hook, make sure this component is wrapped inside the session provider. Do we understand provider? Do we remember providers for recoil? Recoil में we understood providers. Recoil में we used the recoil provider. I don't think we've used any other provider. Context API we remember. Thoda. Back then we used providers as well. So these guys also say that we have to use providers, specifically the session provider over here. How can I wrap my complete application inside a session provider? So the dumb way to do it is this. कि यार मैं क्या करूँगा? I will create another component called function real home, let's say, and I will move all of this logic here. And जो हमारा actual home वाला component है, यहाँ पे I'll return a div, which will wrap the session provider, which will wrap the real home component, something like this. This is one approach. कि what I'm going to do is जो home component है, div भी हटा दो, इसके अंदर I will wrap the real home component, this one right here, inside the session provider. Because whenever you want to use this hook, you have to make sure ये hook जहां use हो रही है here, that thing is wrapped inside a session provider. The session provider is wrapping the real home component. The real home component is using the use session hook. This is the first approach and this approach works. इसमें कोई कमी नहीं है. Let's see it in action. To recap, when we were looking at the docs, it said the use session React hook in Next.js is the easiest way to check if someone is signed in. make sure that session provider is added somewhere. This is not relevant for NextJS 13 plus, but it is relevant 15 plus में कुछ और करना होता है, 13 plus में कुछ और करना होता है, तो underscore app.js is something you don't need to worry about. But wherever we are using this hook, we have to wrap that component inside the session provider, similar to recoil provider, if you remember from the recoil classes. Let's see it in action. If I go to localhost colon 3000 now, it says log out over here, which is great. Matlab the user is logged in. Let's add a few more things. Let's make it a little pretty. Let's convert this into a button. If the user is authenticated, then render a button that says log out. And when the user clicks on this button, on click, call the logout function that comes from the NextAuth library. Could have sworn there is a logout button function that this guy exports. There is a sign in function. क्या होता है वो फंक्शन, कौन बताएगा मुझे चैट में? What is that function called? Where does it export it from? It is logout only. Sign out. I think that's it. You're right. Sign out. There you go. Sorry about that. When the button is clicked, call the sign out function. The types are a little different, so let's do this. If the session is authenticated, render button, clicking on which signs out the button, which again comes from this library. And similarly, this library has another function called sign in that you can import. And you can say if the session is unauthenticated, then render a button which when you click on it calls the sign in button function. This is the code that I've written for my nav bar of sorts. This is sort of a nav bar, right? It should be upar thoda. But mota mota, it's like a nav bar. Let me just get rid of all of this so it appears at the top of the screen. Sign in button is what I see right now. If I refresh, sign in, which means I have been logged out. When I click on the sign in button, it takes me to API auth sign in. When I log in over here, it takes me back to the landing page with the logout button. Now I am logged in. If I refresh, I see logout works. Like the authentication works. If I click on logout, I am logged out, back to sign in page. So this is the basics of client side authentication now. What did I do? I tried to create a landing page जहाँ पे initially there is a sign in button. When the user clicks on the sign in button, they get redirected to this sign in page. यहाँ पे they can sign in with their credentials. And once they do, they will reach back the landing page with the logout button. If I keep refreshing now, the user is signed in. If I click on the logout button, then the user comes back to the sign in page. So it seems like authentication is working thanks to the use session hook. Let's try to log what does this use session hook return us. Data null status unauthenticated is what comes right now. But if I click on sign in and actually sign in, then it says data user name is Harkirat, expires in this time, status is authenticated. Where is name Harkirat coming from? It is coming from here. Yahan pe I returned name Harkirat, right? The other fields it has ignored for some reason. We'll come to why that is, and how can you add the other fields. But jo maine name yahan diya tha, name Harkirat, and if I give an email here, let's say email something like this, that will be persisted in the whatever is coming in this client side, in the session. How can we add other things here is a different question. Also, you will see whenever I change a file, the thing logs out. I'll come to why that is. That's because we haven't put a NextAuth secret right now. It generates a random secret every time it reloads. So let me sign in again. And now, as you can see, name is also here, email is also here. There are some fields that NextAuth stores in the session by default, some fields that it ignores. We'll come to later how can you shove more fields in here. And if I log out, the session object now looks like this. So that's how you starting initial points of creating something like this is using sessions on the client slash logging in and seeing a nav bar, seeing a sign in button. So let's start from the top. Let's all recreate everything we have done until now and see if we can reach the same stage we have reached until this point. There were a lot of small things that we did. There is a few things that are left. Let me tell you what is left. There's a lot of things left in Auth now, but there is a get session function. There is a use server session hook. These are the two things we need to understand next. But before we get there, let's all recap everything. Let's rebuild this whole project from scratch on our side to make sure we're understanding what we're doing. Okay? Then I'll do a poll. So let me delete everything. I'll do it a little bit faster. Try to catch up and code along if you want to. I'm going to initialize a fresh Next.js project. Create next app at the rate of latest. I'm going to call it week 20 part 3. Select the default values over here. Would urge you to do the same if you want to make sure you remember all the step-by-step things that we've done. While this is happening, let me open this in Visual Studio Code. I've opened it. What was the next step? It was adding the NextAuth library. NPM. I said the providers is going to be, at least this credentials provider is going to be there. I said the name is going to be login with email. 2 fields, username and password, that is fine. And यहाँ पे I hard coded a user, simply returned username Harkirat, ID say 1, and email harkirat@gmail.com, so on and so forth. In actuality, we would hit a database here. We would make sure the credentials are correct and only then return this, else we would return null. This was all that was needed to bootstrap NextAuth in our Next.js project. Now, if I run this project locally, npm run dev, I can go to localhost :3000 /API/auth/sign-in, put some credentials in here. I also have to add $CSRF equal to true. That is why it's failing for the first time. Now, if I click on sign in with email, I go back to the landing page. Now, landing page, how do you show the login button, logout button, sign in button is a different question. That was what we did next. But authentication, this is all that you need. Less than 3 minutes it took us. This is what my route.ts looks like. Question is, in this global page.tsx, how do we add a, login button, logout button? So if you remember, we said we want to use the session hook. Const session equal to use session. I want to use this hook, but the problem is wherever I am using this session hook or use session hook, I need to wrap this component inside the session provider. So to avoid a slightly complicated discussion on server and client components and how can you have a client component, a server component as a child to a client component, we'll come to that discussion. To avoid that discussion, what I have done is, yahin pe I added a session provider. And I created another function here called, other home, whatever you want to call it, where I'm actually using the use session hook and checking things like if session dot status is authenticated, then render a button. When you click on the button, then we should call the sign out function. And if the status is unauthenticated, Then when you click on it, it should call the sign in function. And यहाँ पे I rendered the other home component. That is it. That is all we have learned in this class until this point. Let's see it in action. If I again go to now localhost colon 3000, one thing it tells me is there is something is unavailable in server components. Session provider is a context. Context are something that runs on the browser. You need will not work in a server component, and hence I have to convert this to a client component. As I said, this will get better when we learn the slightly harder way to do this, where we have some client component having server component as a child, but we'll get there when we get there. When I come here, I see the sign in button. I click on it. I log in. I reach back this page. I see the sign out button. If I refresh, I still see the sign out button. Sign out. I'm signed out. Do we understand this? Let's do a poll. Great. That's a great number. So, a few more things let's discuss. For example, the first thing I'm going to discuss is what we have done over here is again some level of client side rendering. If I refresh this page, inspect, and go to the network tab over here, you will notice there is a request that goes to /session. This request returns an empty object for now. Need not put name there or what? I didn't put the name here. Let me put a name here. Email is there. Let's try it one more time. I would have expected it to have some more data in there, but maybe we don't. Maybe it's stored somewhere else. There is a request that goes to /session and it returns an email and a name, which tells you there is some level of client side rendering happening over here. Basically, this for this use session hook to work, it needs to be a client component. And when you have a client component, you have to do some level of client side rendering. Even though it is client components are server side rendered, that's a whole different discussion. The point is, okay, yahan pe you can't make this an async function, and you can't do this. Okay, const profile information equal to await axios dot whatever get localhost colon 3000 / profile with whatever headers you want to pass from session, let's say. Or you can't do this db dot user dot find one where user id is or email is session dot email. Since this is a client component, you can't really convert this to an async function. Client components cannot be async. Client components cannot talk to the database. Client components have logic, this logic, which will run on the client, on the browser. You can't do this. You can't do any level of server-side rendering, which is why you saw a while back, okay, this session variable was getting populated on the front end. ये जो hook है, when I refresh, I can't make this async. When I refresh, the hook slowly gets populated on the front end based on its request ने क्या लौटाया. If this request returns an empty object, that means the user isn't logged in. But the original bundle does not have this information basically. Basically, we are back to square one, our original problem, which is कि अगर हमें अभी front end पे user की we have to show them their profile picture, we will have to add an effect here, which will run on the client and send a request to the browser, to the server from the client, and we'll do client-side rendering. So this is where the second hook comes into the picture, which is called use server session. There is another hook called use server session, which works in a server component. So abhi tak we have used client components, or the approach that we took was the client doing some level of client-side rendering, the client hitting the backend, getting the session and populating the front end. But if I do this, remove the session provider completely, that is fine. Remove this other home component. If I do this, const session equal to await use server session. Get server session. My bad, it's get server session and not use server session. Why is it not use? Hopefully the people who understand server components understand it. Server components don't re-render, so there is no point of this being a hook. But nahi samajh aaya to that is fine. Then yahan pe let's say I render session. Slight change I've made. Rather than using the use session hook, I have used the get server session function. And notice, use session comes from NextAuth/React. It is telling you कि ये client पे run होगा, React पे run होगा. It will run on the client. It will not run on the server. But get server session comes from NextAuth. So this line of code is actually the same as doing const, whatever, res equal to await axios.get. This only runs on the server, populates on the server and returns filled HTML to the front end. That is what server components do, right? अगर आपको server side rendering करनी है, if you want to do server side rendering, you do all your logic here in an async function. And then, the populated HTML comes to the front end. Server components don't ever render on the client. All of this we'll discuss a little bit more if it's a little confusing when we reach server components versus client components. What's the problem here? JSON.stringify. Oh, I should put this inside a div. My bad. Now, itne se code mein, where I'm not importing anything from NextAuth/React, we will see some level of server-side rendering. Not some level of, we will see server-side rendering. If I now go here, it says null yahan pe. If I go to the network tab and look at the very first response that comes back, it has null right here. That was not true in our original approach. If I press Command Z a few times and see our original approach, where we were using the use session hook, if I refresh this now, notice nothing came in the first request. We sent another request from the front end to the session endpoint, got back whether or not the user is logged in, then populated this sign in function. But if I go to the other approach that I showed you, that is much lesser to look at, that uses the get server session function. Yahan pe, I got a pre-populated null over here. And if I go to /API/auth/signin and I sign in over here, फिर फट गया. I need to add a secret. One more thing I have to do is add a JWT secret over here. One thing I missed was I did not add a secret over here. Let me add that and let's try it one more time. If I go to /API/auth sign in over here, refresh, still see null. Decryption operation failed. Time to debug. NextAuth secret नहीं डाला है मैंने. I thought this much was good enough. Seems like it isn't. One more thing you have to do is you have to add a NextAuth_secret as a global variable or an environment variable, sorry. So create a top level.env file and add a random NextAuth secret over here in the top level.env file. And now for the third time, if I go to localhost:3000 /API/auth/signin. Try to sign in over here. I still see the same error. I'm coming to chat very soon. Let me just try one last thing, which is restarting considering I just created the env file. Or API auth sign in with email, till see null dot env. Yeah, I'm out of ideas now. We'll have to debug this more. But let's see if someone in chat already knows. I mean, one more thing is this. I don't think it'll fix it, but I'll still try. The warning is clearly telling us that there is no NextAuth URL that we have defined, which you should. So let's see, is that the last thing, and that's what will fix it. There's a high probability it does, but we'll see. /API/auth/signin. Did not. So time to open chat and see if someone knows this. Nahi to I'll debug. Anyone know what I'm missing? No. Async process.env. You are awaiting a function next URL. .10. No, you don't. .10 works automatically. Await. I've missed an await somewhere. Where have I missed the await? I have an await over here. So that's not it. Let's see if someone else knows something. Use server, nahi chahiye GWT, remove await. Oh, this isn't a promise. No, it is a promise. We need to await it. Session provider, you don't need. .env, you don't need in Next.js. It automatically picks things up from the .env file. Yeah, that might be it, what someone posted. Even though I thought that would happen automatically. But the NextAuth secret that we have put over here, someone suggested, which was another thing I had at the back of my head, which is that we add this over here. So secret equal to process.env.nextAuth secret. Let's see, does that fix it? And also, just so people who are saying we should add .env, let me log this so you guys can see. Okay, this automatically comes as an environment variable. The .env file is automatically parsed in Next.js. You don't need the .env library. So let's try that one more time. npm run dev. Let's go to localhost colon 3000 / API auth signin. And as you can see, this is logged over here, which means, the NextAuth secret does exist in process.env.nextAuth secret. Let's try to log in. And this time it worked. So what fixed it? Secret process.env.nextAuth secret. I had to set this secret over here. Pehle I hard coded this, but you don't hard code this. You have to put it in an environment variable. It is used somewhere else also. You have to give it here also. Okay? The thing to know is, if you go to the network tab now and look at the first request, iske response mein you get everything. So now we have what we wanted. When you go to the profile endpoint for this user, let's say this was the profile endpoint. So yahan pe you have access to their username. So yahan pe you can do whatever, user profile equal to db.avatars.find one, where email is session.email, and yahan pe you can simply render the user profile.avatar or something like that. So now we have real server-side rendering when we are using get server session. This function is what you will use most of the times in Next.js when you're getting some information for this user. For example, when you go to app.100steps.com/courses, or the home page also, you see all of these courses that you have access to. Where is this? On the /home endpoint. So if you go to github.com/code100x/cms/source/app/home, which is probably here, main page is home. So when you go over here, notice what are we doing at the top? Const session equal to await get server session. Same thing I'm doing over here. Pehle get the user ka session on the server. कि कौन है ये बंदा? Then if they're not logged in, then to just send them back to the landing page. Else, you greet them with greetings, this thing, for example, whatever you see over here. Happy to see you back, Harkirat. That is what This line does. And then you render the my courses component, which, if you go to the my courses component, we probably have, वहाँ पे भी probably we use get server session, which is why it works. Let's see. My courses is in app slash components slash my courses. And if you go here, यहाँ पे भी call get courses, which again calls get server session. So in all of these components, I use get server session ताकि server पे ही render हो. These are all server components. Pre-rendered page comes to the front end. And that is exactly what happens here. When you refresh, immediately you see all the courses over here. You don't see a loader. जिसके बाद there is a request from the front end and then it renders. The first request that goes to /home, the top of that request, as you saw, the first request that goes to the /home endpoint, at the top over here, we use the get server session function and then, render them a greeting and render them their courses. So that is how you use or do server-side authentication. So we understood in today's class why we can't do JWT plus local storage. NextAuth credentials provider, use session hook and the get server session function. These are the things that we have learned today. There still are a few things left. Specifically, there is callbacks that are left. There is how to add a DB here that is left. Where do you actually store the database? There is a very nice Prisma adapter that we also use that will, automatically put the users in a database that we should probably learn. There is providers.jsx that we need to learn. So all of this we'll probably do next week. Tab tak maybe practice a little bit of NextAuth so that next week isn't too hard. But this is what we have covered today. With that, did you understand it? Do you understand authentication in Next.js using NextAuth? Let's do a poll. All right, 85% is decent, not good, honestly. So we will see how we are able to fix that next week. But long story short, this is the merge stack, guys. This is more than you will find anywhere else, or that you need to know for basic projects. एक mono repo चीज बची है and turbo repo, which without that you will be able to work. But next week, उसके अगले week, let's create a few projects and then we'll come back to slightly advanced projects. And meanwhile, let me start DevOps as well offline. But beta mota tailwind we have done. Next we have done, NextAuth we have done. There are some topics in Next that are left, NextAuth that are left, but we can also learn them through a project or learn them separately to a project. But यहाँ तक अगर आपने cover कर लिया, I'll call this a good checkpoint week 20. This same checkpoint is week 13 in cohort 1. But if you've been able to complete until week 20, you're at a pretty decent point. If you understood everything that's being taught and if you've छोटे-छोटे nuanced चीजें that we've talked about बीच में during Q&A or otherwise, if you've understood, that will help you a lot in interviews as well. But मोटा-मोटा now start to build projects. There's nothing should be holding you back from building projects now. With that, chat is open. All right. Backend as a service like Superbase, sure. Firebase is, I put it in the extras of the cohort, so we can do Firebase or Superbase is very similar. So SEO crawler won't be able to. SEO crawlers never authenticate, go to authenticated pages anyways. Like, how will it log in? They're always stuck at the sign-in page. They never know any authenticated pages. They don't understand them. They shouldn't understand them either. What is that bold icon? Is probably something related to. Oh, that's Zoom, I think. Oh, wait, I think you mean in Next.js. Let's see, where is it? I think when you're in Next.js dev mode, you see that bolt icon. Even though right now the thing that I see seems like an annotator for Zoom. There you go. I don't know if this is Zoom or something else. But yeah, how do I get rid of this? Oh God, the screen is messed up. Eraser. Okay, there we go. Cool. Yeah, I don't know what this is. I didn't put it in my machine. Most probably it's Zoom. By the way, class is done. Like, only if you have questions, feel free to. Backend offline videos. Which videos are left in backend or specific video that you're talking about? There's one called Node.js streams that I have to do. Some guys been asking for a while. Notion doc, Notion doc, Notion doc, Notion Google Doc. All right, it's just a bunch of Notion docs, a lot of them repeated. Any other Notion docs? Jiran dal diye, please don't put it again. I've opened them. Anyone else? Any other Notion docs, guys? All right. वे आई मेड अ सेमिनार प्रोजेक्ट, उसके लिए थोड़ा कंफ्यूज रहा हूँ, मोस्ट ऑफ द काम खुद ही करना है। मैं पर देखा था, मुझे वो आइडिया अच्छा लगा, बट द प्रोजेक्ट आई नेवर वर्कड ऑन सम गेमिंग सिंस it's not too difficult to use phaser. Honestly, a lot of people use it here. So you can phaser B1 for a Zep like application isn't too difficult to write. I think the video part will be most difficult for you. All right, and the Notion docs. Did Brave stop IPFS support? I don't know. Maybe they had some sort of grant that expired, or I would assume that was it. So hydration only exists during client-side rendering. When you have a client component, then it gets hydrated on the client. Client-side rendering is so server-side rendering, client-side rendering, static generation. There are a few things. Even when you are using a client component, it doesn't just client-side render. It renders on the server as well. It renders on the client as well. Only thing is the rendering on the client is done just to compare the state between the client and the server. And the hydration is what the extra thing is that happens on the client, which is the HTML that came back originally does not have any JavaScript associated with it, does not have any event handlers, any browser logic. So browser logic लाने का part happens on the client. Okay, a few more questions. Recap for use session hook. The use session hook is a client-side hook, which means it gets exported from NextAuth/React. It is used when you want to do client-side rendering. अगर आपको client पे check करना है if someone is logged in or not on the server. You don't worry about the waterfalling. You don't worry about the request is going from the client again to the backend server and coming back. Then you use this. The use session hook. If you do want to do server-side rendering, use the use get server or get server session hook or function. Project ideas, just go through any of my videos on YouTube. Golang will start. The documentation is done, the videos are left. So when I get to them, I think DevOps is top priority, and then uske baad, this is my fourth class. I thought you said you are in your fourth class. You will feel overwhelmed. You should go through shuru se and not dive in directly to this class. Of course, it will be a little hard. But yes, this is, if you already reached week 8 in 4 weeks, I think that's a decent start. So what is the problem here? I'm not sure if I'm doing the correct approach, but this is what I'm sending from my front end to Express to create a course. I want to upload the files to Cloudinary, store the thumbnail file. This is the URL to the file, I would assume. And video of each content to the database. And so the URL of the thumbnail image and the video content to the database. I am successful in doing this, but I feel there isn't a better approach. In fact, for some reason, you've nailed the perfect approach the first time, which is you shouldn't send the image to the server and then from there put it to Cloudinary. From the browser itself, you should put it on Cloudinary. From videos from browser itself, put it to, Cloudinary is not the best service. You should use something like S3. Over there, you should use something like pre-signed URLs, which is an interview question that was asked to someone in a 100K interview. He wasn't able to answer it. The right way to send files to a backend is exactly what you have done. Send it from the browser to some store, and then the URL is what you have to send from here. So this approach is actually correct. There's nothing wrong here. Video file, and thumbnail file is exactly how you should do it. Surprisingly, this is the first approach thought of. Usually people send their video to the backend. Backend says they send it to S3, which is the bad approach. But seems like you're using FS. So now, yeah, that's not right. Seems like you've not done what you've said, at least over there. This is your backend controller where you're uploading things to Cloudinary. Yeah, so this is not good. Videos or photos should be sent from the browser directly to Cloudinary. You should not send them to your Node.js server and from your Node.js server send them to Cloudinary. That is bad. Why is that bad? Thousands of reasons. One, why do you want to take so much load when the browser set can directly go to Cloudinary? Why are you doing such a heavy process on your backend? And more importantly, your backend has limits on how much it can store at a point. Then you can start streaming it from your backend. But it's just complicated. Why are you reinventing the wheel when someone already has browser to object store direct uploads? You don't have to put a layer in the middle. When we use a standard username and password for user login, the username is saved in the database and all the users' data linked to username or ID. If you're using NextAuth, so pretty simple, right? If you're using the credentials provider, then here you can check, is this username already in the database? If it isn't, that means the user is trying to sign up, put it in the database. If it is, then compare the passwords. So in the authorize function, you can do a bunch of database calls. Go to CMS repository, same thing is done. How to get client ID in Google Auth? Let me quickly show you. Go to GCP console. Of course, we will cover it. But if you go here, search for OAuth, go to credentials, click on create credentials, click on auth client ID. Feel free to watch the video when it gets uploaded. But I clicked on credentials, auth client ID, select a web application, give it a name, for example, chess, and then add localhost colon 3000 here. And add, very important, localhost colon 3000 slash API call auth Google callback or callback Google. One of these two things. I don't know which one. This one's fine. You have to go to NextAuth docs. It's written over there. Click on create. And then it will spit out a client ID and client secret for you. This is the client ID, this is the client secret. Put it in your env file, you're good to go. Notion locker not be found. Hybrid tracking. With the use of PGAI, LangChain where contextual interaction with the document is uploaded. This part, I don't know, PGAI and contextual interaction with document uploaded. My guess is this is a platform where you can come, upload a document and talk to it. मुझे समझ आ रहा है. So it does say you have to use a hybrid architecture using most of RAG. This part I understand, but it seems like they don't want you to just build RAG. They want you to build a hybrid platform with RAG and PGAI, the process extension that simplifies data storage to develop RAG and other AI applications. This is built by timescale. Okay, it automates creation and sync of embedding for data. So, ooh, this is beautiful. So what this does is, okay, let's see. Let's see. It's an interesting thing. Let's look into it. Let me get my phone.
Allowing you to build AI systems like RAG and search and agents a lot more
आगे बताओ
easily
भाई.
when you use Postgres and PG. In this video, I'm going to take you through how PGAI Vectorizer works and also show you a demo about how you can create embeddings in PGAI Vectorizer in just a few minutes using the example of sound on this box. Let's get into it. So what I have in front of me is a system overview, system architecture diagram of PGAI Vectorizer. The first part is that you control PGAI Vectorizer from the database. You set up the Vectorizer in SQL, and everything that Vectorizer needs to operate is actually in the database. So you have your source data table with your data network embeddings on.
Correct. So you have a source data table जहाँ पे आपका data stored है. Then you have a trigger that pushes things to a work. Now ये मुझे नहीं पता ये क्या है. And this is the embeddings table. Embeddings समझ आती है, original data समझ आता है. This is your original textual data. This is your embeddings table where the embeddings for that specific data is stored. And how does this get populated is the question. Trigger puts it to a queue. Queue से यहाँ पे probably gets picked up. Perfect. Worker checks for the work in the work queue, reads the config from the database, chunks and formats the database, sends text to the embedding service for embedding, writes the embedding to the embedding storage table, this thing. आप data यहाँ डालते हो. You have a trigger that pushes to a, do you know what database triggers are? You can add triggers or functions to a database. Whenever data is put to something, that something puts it to a queue. Then there are a bunch of workers that are pulling things from the queue and pushing it to an embeddings table. This is a fancier way of doing RAG. The standard way of doing it is कि ये सब आप खुद करते हो. You are the one who implements all of this. But these guys are saying if you use PGAI, the source data to embeddings table conversion can be handled by PGAI as long as you start a bunch of PGAI workers. That is very beautiful. Actually, I would like to build a YouTube video on this. So I still don't understand what they mean by a hybrid approach. Architecture using most of RAG. PGI where contextual interaction. Yeah, so put your project over here. I'll look at this doc at the end also, okay, what your exact project is. But mota, it's not too difficult. If you build a simple RAG application without PGAI, then build one using PGAI. Most probably that's what they want. Building API for generating embeddings from Mistral API, install them in a vector database in Pinecone vector store, and using LangChain prompt to talk with. Sounds good. Upload to a PDF type project. That looks decent. You any resources you told to send directly from GitHub to cloud, but how do you, yeah, that's where pre-signed URLs come into the picture. So learn about or read about pre-signed URLs in S3 git init git add dot git commit init git remote add origin github.com code 100 xtest code 3 create a new repository week 22 public and create it. push it. All right, that's the, oh, oopsie daisy. That's the repo for today. All righty. Cool. Do you have anything else here? Did you put the project? What are you building? No, you haven't. All right, I'm closing this. Oh, wow. The UI is very clean. And I like what you've built. And, by today, the Notion docs share questions, only 20% of questions. Don't get, honestly, if I open it, I'll probably understand 20% of the questions there. Not everything, but you should. Jaldi se padh lo na, there are interview questions. People are dumb, people are going to ask you those questions. Dumb people who don't know actual JavaScript will ask you what a closure is in JavaScript or, whatever. These questions, just khatam kar do unko. Even I don't know half of them. So don't worry कि आपको कम आता है तो. Oh, not the right person to guide on that, unfortunately. All right, done. यहाँ क्या हो गया? I am getting hydration error for a fresh project as well. Try to. It might happen. So remove all the extensions in case you have any. But what is your code? You didn't put your code in here. So put your code so that I can look at it. I know. Hydration and middleware. Hydration we've sort of covered. I'll cover it again. Middlewares, server components versus client components. We will do it. Not today, but in an offline. We will do it. अंकुर उसको ऑफलाइन वीडियोस के स्टैक में डाल देना, नहीं तो मैं भूल जाऊंगा. Yeah, it's a very good idea. I love it. It's like Scrimba, right? If I build something like Scrimba, I will do a bounty if someone builds it. But it needs to be very close to it. It's very hard, VS Code. I don't know. It's not very sticky, but build it. So I'll do some bounty. But I don't think it'll work. I think it's not very sticky. I don't think people use it too much. But Scrimba is a nice platform. Quiz was originally thought to be built like Scrimba, but I was like, that's a little too much effort for not enough outcome. All right. Yeah, man. Great. So you have a backup, and then now's your time to go all in. Gave 2 interviews last week. PH was struggling to find an internship. That's fine. But you gave 2 interviews. So what happened there? I think the hard part is finding the interview. If you have completed everything until this point in this cohort, and you're going for a month-stack interview, unless you mess something up really bad in the interview, it shouldn't be too difficult to get through. So if you've, I gave, right? What went wrong there, and try to do whatever RC of what went wrong, and if it was DSA, do DSA. If it was system design, do system design. If it was month-stack questions, JavaScript questions, do that. Why does Next.js doesn't support FS module? It could or it could not. I don't know. Import FS from FS. It depends on where you're using it, I would assume, but I could be wrong. So let's see. This is the global page.tsx and f.default doesn't work. It's called, oh, there you go. It does work. What are you saying? Yeah, it works. I added this. There's no error. If there's a file over here, let me add one quickly. Layout.txt utf-8. Console. आप उसको client component में use कर रहे हो, that's probably why. DB is not defined. कहाँ डाल दिया ये मैंने? Okay, remove that. I don't see the log. I don't see it getting logged, so maybe it doesn't. There you go, undefined. For some reason, data got undefined. Yeah, there you go. It works. No such file directory layout.txt. Just make sure putting the right directory function. It'll work. You're probably doing it on a client function. That's why it's not working. You have the data. Yeah, you're running FS on a client component, which is probably causing it. So do it on a server component. Or a server component. Yeah. Problem, the company is not registered yet. My salary is being transferred directly to a personal account through a mobile app. Mwah, chef's kiss. That's what else do you want? Avoid all taxes. Specifically to answer your question, where the fuck is my phone? If the amount is too big, then you should talk to them. If it's small, then I don't think anyone cares, including the government. Of 10. Scalable will come when you reach a lot of scale. Even though if you want to do it for learning, feel free to do it for learning. I have a video on YouTube where I talk about how WebSockets are scaled. March I released it. It's a 4-hour video. You can go through that. Feature-wise, I don't know. There's not too much to build in Scribble. Yeah, it's pretty good. As long as the events are going to the other side, people are coming, everything is fine. This is a great idea actually. I wanted to build it back in the day. So yeah, answer this one. Here we go. I know. Are we going to use state management libraries in Next? You don't really need them anymore because of async components, as you said, but context is good enough basically. Also, since we use server components has no point of state, so you don't need it in most of the places now. Again, this use them is saved in the database. Okay, answer this question. I feel using. I answered this question. बाकी के भूल गया था. Yeah, we'll work serverless backends. We'll learn about serverless backends. Done this. Sunidhi ji ने कुछ बनाया है. Can you brief about architecture of Provo? It's very close to a centralized exchange, but not today. It's a very long architecture. It was like 2-hour class I took in Super 30s. You won't be able to do it in 5 minutes. How to improve this project? Okie dokie. What is that? Oh, this is very good. This is another Super 30 project. What are you doing? Are you shadowing Super 30 somehow? Live or right? I'm late. Let me. I'm gonna join a meeting. All right. But it seems like you're using LiveKit. My guess would be you're using LiveKit is on this UI, and you are using Video SDK, which is also a good company. ठीक है, not bad, not good. Pretty good actually. Add more things to it. You probably just use their APIs. Build something on top. Add like a whiteboard that's completely built by you, so on and so forth. But I don't know what to put. I don't know experience. So create some projects and put them there. I think that's a good starting point. Don't contribute to open source just yet. First, build your own projects. How to override the front end of NextAuth? You can add pages as override here. For example, if you go to, we have a custom sign-in page there, right? In app.nextauth.com, it is defined over here, lib slash authority. If you look at our NextAuth config, there is a section here called pages. Basically, add this to the configuration. Pages, sign-in page is this, तो आपका sign-in page वो बन जाएगा. Add a custom page over there. Go through the code of CMS, it has that. Cool. All right. Sorry, I had to speed through this today. I'm a little late for a meeting. It was supposed to be at 10. So I'll call it. And there are a few things that are left. Oops, Daisy, where is it? There are a few things that are left in NextAuth and on Next. We probably need another week for it, basically. So let's do them next week. And then we'll go from there. Uske baad we can build projects and go from there. All right. ठीक है जी. Sorry for the very quick, fast doubt session. We'll call it here. Have a good night, folks. I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye. 2 more docs I'll pick. Jaldi se. 1, 2. General Stack is generally used in backend of Web3 companies. It's Mern or Python. Sometimes Rust and Golang as well, actually. It's too many things. It is not Java for sure. It is not Ruby on Rails for sure. It is Golang, Rust, Mern, or maybe Python, but Golang, Rust mostly. But I want to transition to Solana development. Solana has a lot of, if you're good at DevOps, RPC companies would hire you. So, you should apply for Helios. Helios is one RPC company. They were hiring a DevOps engineer. In fact, their biggest DevOps engineer is from India. He used to work at DigitalOcean. The lead DevOps engineer at Helios was looking for a team in India. So if you're really good at DevOps, he'll almost hire you like this. I think they might be still hiring. They've raised again. I think they'll probably hire you if you're good. So if you're good at DevOps, Helios is the company I would recommend. Golang. Yeah, there isn't a lot of company in Golang, but an RPC company most probably has a lot of cloud systems that are written in Golang. And also, if you're really good at Golang, you should ping me also. So here is my number, 7063. If you did not hear it, please message 100x Twitter, and I would love to get in touch. If you're really good at DevOps, then let's talk directly also. I can hire you. I can refer you at Helios as well. And if you're really good at Golang, there's another company that was hiring for DevOps.